The clock struck 9:30 p.m., casting a soft, steady rhythm through the silent apartment. I couldn't stop checking my phone, waiting for Kyle's call or message, though deep down I knew he wasn't coming home. For weeks, his life had been a series of excuses, unexplained overtime, and evasive responses whenever I tried to express my growing anxiety. Tonight was no different, and the distance between us seemed to widen with each passing hour. I tried to convince myself these were just paranoid thoughts, mere imagination running wild. But the subtle signs created doubts within me, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Small lies, sudden meetings, prolonged absences. Something was definitely wrong. As I stared at the front door, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I remembered our earlier days, when we would share dinner and talk about work, dreams of having children, and building a family. That conversation was now only a vague memory of a past event. Kyle was so focused on his own alternate world that I had disappeared from his life. Finally, the front door opened. Kyle came in looking tired as always, carrying a work bag in his hands that looked empty. I watched silently as he carelessly dropped his keys on the table and removed his jacket. A faint hint of women's perfume lingered in the air, subtle but enough to turn my stomach. He avoided looking at me, rushing towards the bathroom with an urgency that spoke volumes. In that moment, something inside me completely shattered. For weeks, I had been ignoring the signs, making excuses, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But now, everything was crystal clear. Something had happened. Someone else was involved. The sound of running water in the bathroom filled the uncomfortable silence of our apartment. My hands trembled as I stood frozen, knowing I couldn't bear this uncertainty any longer. I needed answers, even if the truth might destroy me. As Kyle emerged from the bathroom and casually threw himself on the sofa, I studied him intently. His avoidant behavior, constantly keeping his phone close, his entire demeanor suggested he was hiding something. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Kyle," I said, my voice firm. "What are you hiding?" He looked at me, a mix of surprise and irritation flickering in his eyes. He tried to feign indifference, asking, "What are you talking about?" Anger and sadness swirled inside me like a brewing storm, heat rising to my face. I was exhausted by his evasions and excuses. The time had come to confront him. "Don't play games with me," I said, my voice growing stronger. I knew something was wrong, and I could see it in his eyes. "I know you have something you're not telling me," I said firmly. "We can't pretend everything is okay anymore." Kyle frowned, visibly irritated, and his reaction was exactly what I had feared. For several seconds, he said nothing, and his silence was more revealing than any words could have been. Unable to meet my gaze, he stood up from the sofa, trying to escape the conversation. "I don't have time for your delusions," he muttered, grabbing his jacket as if he was about to walk out again. My heart racing, I stood directly in his path, blocking his escape. I wasn't going to let him run away this time. "Who is she?" I whispered, my eyes locked onto his. Kyle froze, the tension between us thick and suffocating. For a moment, he looked like he might deny everything, as if I were crazy and imagining it all. But then he dropped his gaze, unable to bear the weight of the truth. "It's not what you think," he finally mumbled, not even having the courage to look at me. His words hit me like a splash of cold water. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion, it was now a painful reality. I felt my world crumbling beneath my feet, but simultaneously, a new strength was rising inside me. The moment had come to face the truth and reclaim control of my life. "How could you do this?" My voice trembled with pain. "After everything we've been through, how could you do this to me?" Kyle didn't answer immediately, rubbing his face as if searching for some way to soften the impact. There were no words that could repair what he had done. Finally, he sighed. "It's not working anymore, Christina," he said softly. "We're not the same anymore. You've changed, I've changed." His words cut deeper than the confession of infidelity itself. He wasn't just admitting to physical betrayal, but was also blaming me for the failure of our marriage. As if my longing for a family was somehow the cause of his cheating. I stared at him, desperately holding back tears. But I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. This night marked the end of something. I had lost him long before I discovered his affair. All that remained was reclaiming my dignity. "Go if you want to go," I said with a calmness that surprised even myself. "But don't think this will end so easily." Kyle seemed taken aback by my strength, staring at me for several seconds as if unsure what to expect. Then, without a word, he gathered his things and walked out the door, leaving behind a heavy silence. I stood motionless, staring at the closed door, watching the man I once loved, the man with whom I had dreamed of building a family, walk away. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that from this point forward, my life would take a new direction, a direction I would control. The days that followed were cloudy, visibility was poor, and it was hard to breathe. Kyle's absence echoed through every corner of our home. The silence was better than his lies, but in moments of loneliness, I was forced to confront the reality of our marriage's collapse. The home once filled with shared memories now felt wide and cold, as if it had lost its purpose. Despite Kyle's vague confession, something still gnawed at my insides. I needed to know more. Sitting at my desk, phone in hand, I battled the impulse to dig deeper. I wanted answers, but was I really prepared for what I might find? Finally, I succumbed to the overwhelming urgency. After weeks of living under the shadow of doubt, I could no longer bear the uncertainty. I picked up my phone and began searching social media, checking the few profiles of Kyle's I knew. He had been careful, but hadn't completely closed all doors. Within minutes of searching, an image caught my attention. A recently tagged photo on a woman named Stephanie's profile. At first, I didn't recognize her, but seeing her name made my stomach clench. Stephanie, the same name mentioned in conversations with friends, whom Kyle had described as merely a work colleague. Now, seeing a photo of them together, smiling in a way that left no room for doubt, I felt the air leave my lungs. The betrayal was finally exposed, and I sat frozen, staring at the screen. I wished the scene would just disappear. But their intimate smile, their closeness, confirmed what I had known deep down. Everything was a lie. Not just Stephanie's relationship with Kyle, but all of his words over the past weeks. Every excuse, every broken promise, had been to protect his affair. Pain began transforming into anger. My heart raced as an inner storm grew more intense with each passing moment. This was more than just infidelity. It was the fact that he had toyed with my emotions, making me feel as if the problems were my fault. I remember him blaming me and making me feel inadequate because of my desire for a family. Kyle had manipulated every aspect of our relationship, convincing me that the distance between us was my doing. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Without hesitation, I dialed Kyle's number. After several rings, he answered in a monotonous voice that suggested nothing had changed. "What do you want, Christina?" he asked with contempt, as if receiving my call was a mere inconvenience. I gripped the phone tightly, suppressing the tremor in my voice. This time, I wouldn't be the vulnerable woman he imagined. "I know everything about Stephanie," I said in a sharp, direct tone. "You can't lie anymore. You can't hide anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could picture Kyle's expression, his usual condescending attitude crumbling within seconds. "So what?" he finally responded. His indifference cut even deeper, another betrayal on top of everything else. "It's not your concern anymore," he said. Those brazen words fueled my inner rage. I could feel my blood boiling. Kyle had not only destroyed our marriage but showed no remorse for his actions. Each word from his mouth pushed me toward a resolution I had never before considered. Ending everything. "I'm filing for divorce," I said with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. "And I'll make sure you don't get everything your way." He fell silent, though I couldn't see him. I knew my declaration had shocked him. I was no longer the woman he thought he knew. The Christina who had endured his lies and arrogance was gone. I was determined to take control of my life and protect what was mine. Kyle let out a bitter laugh, echoing emptily through the phone. "Divorce? How do you think you'll win?" he spat with pure contempt. "You know everything you have is because of me. You'll be left with nothing, Christina." But I stood firmer than ever before. "We'll see about that," I responded with a dangerous calm. "You no longer have any power over me." Kyle hung up, feeling adrenaline coursing through his body. The burden he'd carried for weeks began to dissolve. I knew the road ahead would be tough, but this time I was no longer afraid of him. From now on, he has no control over me. That night, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I felt a strength I had never known before. I was prepared for the battle to come. I had lost Kyle, but gained something far more valuable, my own resolve. I had made a decision and knew I wasn't alone in this fight. Tomorrow, I would contact a lawyer. I would protect what was mine and make it clear that no one, especially Kyle, would trample over me again. The morning dawned gray, reflecting the storm raging inside me. After our phone call, I hadn't slept. My thoughts tormented me, anger and pain mixing with fear of what was to come. But something had changed. This time, it wasn't fear holding me back, but a strong conviction that there was no turning back. That morning, I chose not to stay home. I walked to the law office I'd heard about just days before. Anthony, the owner, was renowned for his skill in divorce cases. Something I never imagined I'd need, but now knew was my best option. The office building looked intimidating, but I walked through the doors with my head held high. Each step felt like a step towards freedom. The place had a calm atmosphere, yet a palpable tension hung in the air. While waiting at the reception, I mentally reviewed the last months of my marriage. The signs I'd ignored, Kyle's empty promises. The betrayal caused pain, but with that pain came my determination to fight, which gave me new strength. After a while, Anthony welcomed me into his office. He had a calm voice and sharp eyes that conveyed trustworthiness. For the first time in weeks, I felt I had an ally. "Tell me what happened," he said with calm seriousness. "I need to know all the details to help you." I took a deep breath and began sharing everything. From when I first noticed Kyle's changes to discovering Stephanie. Each word I spoke slowly lifted the burden I'd been carrying. Anthony listened carefully, taking notes and asking precise questions as our conversation progressed. My conviction in my decision grew stronger. When I finished, he leaned back, analyzing what he'd just heard. "This is a strong case," he stated definitively. "Kyle has no right to your assets. Not only can we protect your property, but with proper evidence, we can prove his infidelity caused the marriage's breakdown. It won't be easy," he continued, "but we have all the tools we need to win." I nodded, feeling heartened by his determination. Confronting Kyle would be complicated, but I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. Now that the truth was out, there was nothing left to fear. It was time to protect everything I'd worked so hard to build. After the consultation, I returned home with complex emotions. The path I'd chosen wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. Kyle had severely underestimated my ability to defend myself. Now, I had to face the consequences of his betrayal. This was no longer about revenge, but about justice. It was time to make him understand that he couldn't crush me. Hours later, when the phone rang, I knew it was him. Steeling myself to hear him out, I answered with a steady hand. "Are you really going to continue this, Christina?" Kyle's voice was tense, as if trying to regain control of the situation. "You know this won't be good for you. Don't make this difficult," he said. I gave a bitter smile, remembering how he'd used these tactics for years to manipulate me and make me doubt myself. But that Christina no longer existed. "You won't get your way anymore, Kyle," I answered with a calmness that seemed to surprise him. "You underestimated me and made a mistake. Now you'll face the consequences." "I'm not giving up." The silence on the other end of the line proved he hadn't expected this response. For the first time, Kyle seemed hesitant. "You're making a mistake, Christina," he coldly retorted. "Stephanie is now part of my life. You can't stop that. Do what you want. But you won't win. Everything you have is mine. I won't let you walk away with anything." His words ignited something inside me, but no longer caused the pain it once would have. Kyle was revealing his true nature. This was not an end to our relationship or an amicable breakup, but a selfish declaration of intent to hurt me and then leave with no consequences for himself. But I was prepared. "I'll fight to the end," I answered without hesitation. "Believe me, Kyle. I'm not the woman you can manipulate anymore. What's mine is mine. You can't scare me anymore." The call ended with a dry click. The room's air seemed to lighten, as if each spoken word had removed a burden from my shoulders. I slowly exhaled and sank into the sofa. I knew the road ahead would be challenging. But something inside me had become unbreakably strong. That night, while the city slept, I felt something awakening within myself. The fear and sadness that had paralyzed me for so long had transformed into fierce determination. Kyle, with his contempt and selfishness, had awakened a woman without limits. Divorce was not just an ending, but the beginning of something new. A life without betrayal and lies. With Anthony as my ally and a conviction to fight for justice, I felt closer than ever to reclaiming my life. The next morning arrived with a strange stillness. I awoke with a lightness I hadn't felt in months. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows as I made coffee, my thoughts no longer trapped by doubt or fear. The decision was made, the path was clear. There was no turning back. It was time to begin legal proceedings. After our phone call, I knew Kyle would do everything possible to complicate the divorce. I understood the battle would be fierce, filled with traps and manipulation. But I also knew Anthony was on my side. My lawyer's confidence gave me the courage I needed to stand strong. When I arrived at Anthony's office, he was surrounded by documents that looked like carefully planned strategy maps. Knowing I was about to embark on a battle that might last months, I offered a modest smile. "We're ready, Christina," Anthony looked up from the papers. "The first documents are prepared. We need to start strong and give the other side no room to maneuver." I nodded as I sat down. His words reassured me. I knew Kyle wouldn't give up without a fight, but there was something trustworthy about the lawyer's precision. From the beginning, he had been clear and honest with me. No false promises, just a commitment to fight with everything he had. "What's the next step?" I asked, wanting to be fully informed. Anthony placed his hand on the desk and explained the initial strategy. First, we would formally submit a divorce petition that would expose Kyle's infidelity and his attempts to steal my assets. This would lay the groundwork for a strong defense in court. Property division would be the main battlefield, but Anthony was confident the evidence I'd gathered would tip the scales in my favor. "This won't be over quickly, Christina," he warned. "You need to prepare for months of emotional exhaustion. But we will win." Those words echoed in my heart as I returned home. My resolve remained unshaken. I knew each step of this process would be exhausting, but there was no going back. Kyle had broken something inside me, but he had also awakened a power that no one could stop. When the divorce notice reached Kyle, his reaction was immediate. The vibrating phone on my desk was like the harbinger of a storm. I knew it was him, and when I answered, his venomous voice was exactly as I expected. "Do you really think you can throw me out like this?" he asked, making no attempt to hide his anger. "This won't end well for you, Christina. I'm warning you." I didn't waver. I had anticipated this tone, another attempt to control everything. But I was no longer vulnerable to his words. "I have nothing to fear," I answered with a calmness that seemed to confuse him. "What I'm doing is right, and you know it. You can't intimidate me anymore." Silence followed on the other end of the line. As if Kyle was trying to process what he'd just heard. I had changed. And that was what truly unsettled him. "I'm not just going to sit back and watch," Kyle continued, his voice lowered but still filled with resentment. "If you want to fight, let's fight. But I promise you'll regret this." I replied quickly and hung up without giving him a chance to speak again. I knew his threats were hollow, born from the fear of losing what he believed he controlled. Now the power was in my hands. I would no longer allow my life to revolve around Kyle's desires. That same afternoon, Anthony submitted the first documents to the court, making the divorce request official. Legal proceedings had begun, and with them, a new chapter of my life. Reviewing the documents at home, I felt a mix of emotions: relief at taking the first step, coupled with underlying anxiety about what was to come. This divorce was more than a battle over material assets, it was a fight for my mental peace and dignity. Kyle, blinded by his own arrogance, couldn't see that he had already lost the most valuable thing, my respect. That night, sitting on the sofa, I noticed something different. The home that once felt empty now seemed to breathe a new air. Perhaps it was a sense of freedom, a feeling of slowly reclaiming my life. Or simply the fact that I no longer expected anything from Kyle, no longer needed him to define my happiness. As days passed, the initial legal moves began to take shape. Letters from the lawyers came and went, each message bringing new concerns, but I remained resolute. Anthony constantly updated me, preparing me for what was to come. I knew Kyle would try to take everything possible, but I was also prepared to stand against him. The Christina who had been betrayed and manipulated no longer existed. A new woman had risen in her place, ready to fight for her future, her dignity, and the life she deserved. Divorce was not an end, but the beginning of something much larger. The air in the conference room was heavy. With each breath, I felt the weight of the moment, but I kept my posture straight. Kyle sat across from me, a sardonic smile playing on his lips, his arrogant gaze clearly indicating he had no intention of backing down easily. I knew the divorce process wouldn't be simple. The confrontation about to begin would be more intense than I had imagined. Anthony sat beside me, reviewing documents with unwavering calm. He was my support, my shield against Kyle's attacks. Listening to the opposing lawyer's first words, I understood that in this battle to protect what was mine, every move would be crucial. This was a fight not just for property, but for dignity. "We're here to reach a fair agreement," Kyle's lawyer said with a false smile, placing documents on the table. "My client believes he has rights to the majority of shared assets, considering his economic contributions during the marriage." The words were sharp, and even though I recognized them as a strategy to intimidate me, they still stung. Kyle had always been skilled at manipulating the narrative, ensuring everything worked in his favor. For years, he had undervalued my contributions, making me feel that even the little I had was because of him. Anthony was unimpressed. With a neutral expression, he reviewed the documents. After a few tense seconds of silence, he looked up. "My client has significantly contributed to the growth of their assets," Anthony responded calmly. "Moreover, the evidence of her husband's infidelity and clear financial manipulation does nothing to strengthen his position." Kyle frowned, his smile completely disappearing. I carefully observed every reaction. I could see he had underestimated the situation, never expecting me to defend myself so strongly. For years, he had believed he could manipulate me at will. Now he was watching me change, unable to stop it. "I don't intend to waste time," he interrupted irritably. "If you want to continue this game, fine. But you know I'll leave you with nothing." "I won't let that happen." His words were an empty threat, but I no longer felt fear. I looked directly into his eyes, maintaining a calmness I had struggled to find in previous days. Despite his threatening tone, he could no longer intimidate me. I could now see beyond his words and empty threats. "That will be for the judge to decide," I answered with a coldness that seemed to surprise Kyle. "You can't control me anymore." The next few hours became a battle of words and legal maneuvering. Every document submitted by Kyle's legal team attempted to minimize my contributions, but Anthony systematically dismantled each point with his precision and knowledge. Neither side was willing to show weakness, and we both knew it. By the time the meeting concluded, I was enveloped in fatigue. I could feel the weight of the battle, but something inside me remained strong. The conviction that I would never be trampled again. As we were leaving the building, Anthony paused for a moment and spoke to me. "Well done," he said with a slight smile. "I know this is just the beginning, but you have the advantage." I nodded, grateful for his encouraging words. I understood it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew Kyle no longer held the same power over me. The situation had changed, and now I was in control of my own destiny. The following days were filled with preparation. Letters went back and forth, with lawyers from both sides working quickly to gain an advantage before the trial. Kyle remained an obstacle, with every action designed to destabilize me. Yet, I remained resolute, unwilling to compromise. One seemingly endless night, while reviewing legal documents in the living room, I received a call from Anthony. I knew something significant was approaching. His voice was always calm, but this time it carried something I hadn't noticed before. "Kyle is planning to claim that you neglected the marriage," Anthony said directly. "He's willing to use any excuse to place the blame on you," Anthony added. I fell silent for a moment, absorbing the words. I knew Kyle would do anything to win, but hearing him resort to such tactics still hurt deeply. I had been the one supporting and fighting to maintain our relationship for years. Now he was trying to twist everything and paint me as the villain. What should I do? I finally asked, my voice tense. Anthony sighed before responding. "Don't worry. We have evidence of his infidelity and plenty of testimony about your efforts to save the marriage. Kyle is just playing his last card. We'll stand firm." That night, as I tried to fall asleep, I reflected on how we had reached this point. I had loved Kyle. I believed in him as a partner and had built a life by his side. But over time, he revealed his true nature. Someone who sought only his own interests, using me until I was no longer useful. Now this legal battle was about more than what we had built together. It was about the dignity he was trying to strip away with each of his actions. With each dawn, I felt myself growing stronger. The end of our marriage would be a trial, but I knew I would emerge victorious, not just in court, but in life. The day of the trial arrived with a strange mixture of tension and determination. I woke before sunrise, preparing in front of the mirror, feeling the weight of everything that was about to unfold. I knew this moment would define my future. Each step, each decision would bring me closer to closing this chapter filled with betrayal, pain, and manipulation. Arriving at the courthouse, the corridor's noise barely registered. My attention was focused entirely on what was about to happen, the judge's gaze, the words that would be spoken. Anthony stood beside me, unflappable as always, and we waited for the proceedings to begin. I was nervous, but finally ready to fight Kyle to the end. The courtroom slowly filled with people. Kyle arrived late, as if his tardiness was a final display of control. But his expression betrayed his usual arrogance. He was no longer the confident man from the beginning of the proceedings. Now his eyes carried a shadow of anxiety. Stephanie was not with him. A small but significant detail I didn't miss. The judge entered, and a solemn silence fell over the courtroom. As the lawyer's first words rang out and arguments were exchanged, the atmosphere grew tense. The details of the case were gradually revealed. Evidence of infidelity, Kyle's hidden financial maneuvers, all laid bare for the court's evaluation. Kyle sat before me, avoiding my direct gaze while his lawyer presented distorted facts, portraying me as an indifferent, cold wife. His expression remained impassive, but I was not intimidated by their tactics. I knew who I was and what the truth was. My client is simply seeking a fair division of property, Kyle's lawyer said in a mechanical voice. She has benefited from the marriage without making comparable contributions. Anthony stood up, his expression quiet but resolute. When he began speaking, his voice carried a dignity that commanded everyone's attention. My client has faced not just personal betrayal, he declared firmly, but systematic financial manipulation. Kyle not only committed infidelity but attempted to control everything Christina had built on her own. The evidence of infidelity and malice was mercilessly recorded. Anthony systematically dismantled the opposing side's arguments, presenting clear evidence of Kyle's attempts to hide assets, repeatedly lying about his relationship with Stephanie, and his constant intention to strip away everything Christina had built through her effort and dedication. Financial documents and testimonies from close friends corroborated Anthony's claims. I sat resolute, paying attention to every word. Watching Anthony defend my case with such precision, I felt a new sense of reassurance. I knew the evidence was irrefutable, and Kyle's increasing tension confirmed this. Finally, the judge stopped both sides and began to speak. The courtroom fell silent, everyone holding their breath while awaiting the verdict. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the presented arguments, the judge began in a solemn voice. It is clear that Kyle's actions were harmful to Christina, both personally and financially. Based on the evidence, this court rules in Christina's favor, awarding her the majority of the assets and dismissing the husband's claims. The weight of those words delivered a massive shock to Kyle. For the first time, his expression crumbled, his shoulders dropping in defeat. I observed him silently, feeling no joy or satisfaction, only a deep sense of relief. I had not only won the legal battle but, more importantly, reclaimed the freedom I had long awaited. As the courtroom began to empty, Anthony gave me a reassuring smile. What seemed impossible months ago was now achieved, and my future was filled with possibilities. You did an amazing job, I said with heartfelt gratitude, my voice soft but emotional. I don't know what would have happened without you. We simply did the right thing, Anthony answered humbly. Now, you have an opportunity to start anew. Kyle left the courtroom without a word, his defeat public and definitive. While he could never repair the emotional damage he'd caused, at least justice had prevailed. Stephanie was nowhere by his side, not sharing in his disgrace. Outside the courthouse, I took a deep breath, feeling fresh air on my face. The trial was over, but a new chapter of my life was just beginning. The weight of betrayal was now in the past, and ahead lay paths of rebuilding and renewal. I looked at Anthony with grateful eyes, thankful not just for his legal support, but for standing by me during the darkest period of my life. As we walked toward the car, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. Divorce was no longer a burden, but the end of a period that had ultimately made me stronger. With each step, I moved further away from the shadows of my past, prepared to embrace the future with the strength and courage I had discovered within myself. As I left the courthouse under the strong afternoon sun, a deep sense of relief filled me from the inside. Each step reminded me that I had reached the end of a long, painful battle. Now, having claimed victory, I could feel my life turning in a new direction. The sleepless nights, the constant uncertainty, the fears that had bound me for so long were left behind. No more conflicts with Kyle, no more arguments filled with resentment and contempt. The divorce I had initially feared had become my liberation. The judge's verdict was clear, and I had protected what was mine. Years of effort, all of my sacrifices, had not been in vain. I had preserved not just my assets, but more importantly, my dignity. My ex-husband had tried to take everything, but I had risen even stronger. Standing on the sidewalk, I took a deep breath. The wind gently caressed my face, and for the first time in months, I felt lightness. The tension of the past months began to dissolve, and something new was taking shape inside me. The woman who had been betrayed, humiliated, and manipulated no longer existed. In her place stood a new version of myself. Stronger, more confident. "We did it," Anthony said, approaching me as he put documents away in his bag. His voice was warm, filled with satisfaction. I smiled, a genuine expression I hadn't shown in a long time. The storm had finally passed. "I couldn't have done this without you," I responded, my voice soft but sincere. "You didn't just help me win the trial. You helped me reclaim something I had lost. My confidence in myself." Anthony nodded with that calm expression that had provided me comfort throughout our long battle. He was more than just a lawyer to me. He had been an essential support when everything was falling apart. "This is just the beginning for you, Christina," he said, looking at me with respect. "Now you have the freedom to do what you truly want. No one can stop you." His words resonated in my heart as we walked together down the sidewalk. It was the truth. A new chapter was beginning. No more haunting by past ghosts, no more of Kyle's shadow hanging over my decisions. I had reclaimed control of my life, and for the first time, I felt I could build something completely new. The days ahead would be filled with small steps toward that freedom. I began rebuilding my life, focusing on my mental and physical health. Reconnecting with friends, rediscovering forgotten hobbies, the sadness that had dominated me for so long gradually faded. Work, which once felt like a burden, now became a source of focus and forward momentum. It wasn't all easy, of course. Quiet nights would sometimes bring loneliness, reminding me of the scars Kyle's betrayal had left. But these wounds no longer defined me. The pain that once consumed me was now just a part of my story. Though difficult, it was a chapter that taught me more about myself than I could have ever imagined. One afternoon, while organizing documents in my office, the phone rang. It was Anthony. His usually warm and professional voice sounded different this time. More personal, more intimate. He was inviting me to dinner to celebrate everything we had been through together. I accepted without much hesitation, knowing there was something special between us. A connection that went beyond lawyer and client. Anthony had been a constant support during my darkest moments, my pillar of strength. And now, as we were saying goodbye to the chaos of divorce, I felt our relationship might be transforming into something else. When the evening of our dinner arrived, I felt the most peaceful I had been in a long time. Regaining my balance, I knew there was still a journey ahead, but each step was bringing me closer to the woman I wanted to be. Anthony greeted me with a smile at a quiet restaurant, away from the city's hustle and bustle. Our conversation flowed naturally, with none of the previous tension. We talked about nothing in particular, but there was something different in the air. A quiet understanding, an intimacy born during our months of battle. Anthony was impressed, not just by how I had overcome the legal process, but by how I had been reborn from the ashes of my previous relationship. I saw him in a new light. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of opening my heart again. Dinner passed with shared memories and laughter from our time during the trial. There was no rush, just a desire to purely enjoy the present moment. At the end of the night, walking down streets dominated by city lights, Anthony took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant so much more. I smiled at him, feeling no urgent promises or expectations, just a sense of comfort that after such pain, trust and love were possible again. Perhaps fate was offering me a new opportunity. One I hadn't expected, but was now ready to accept. The future looked bright. I didn't know exactly what path I would take, but I knew I was ready for whatever life might bring. The weeks after the trial passed with a peace I had forgotten existed. Every morning I woke up, the weight on my heart was lighter and I felt a growing sense of relief. The constant, ear-splitting noise of worry that once filled my mind was gone. The legal battle, the conflict with Kyle, was now in the past, and I was surrounded by a stillness full of possibilities. One day, while checking some projects in the office, I felt something different inside me. I was not the same woman who had walked into the law firm months ago. The experience had shaped me in ways I could never have imagined. I had become more confident, stronger, more self-aware. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer caused pain. These scars were now proof of my courage, markers of a story of overcoming. Life continued, but with a new focus. I was learning to enjoy small moments. Morning coffee, conversations with friends, evening walks. The urgent need to find answers or right the past no longer existed. Now, only the present and what I could do with it mattered. The peace I felt was reflected in everything I did, from work to personal relationships. Anthony remained a part of my life, but our relationship had naturally evolved. What began as a professional collaboration transformed into a deeper connection. A friendship that challenged the barriers imposed by time and circumstance. He had always been my anchor, an unwavering support during my darkest times. One afternoon, walking through the park, Anthony broke the comfortable silence between us. His usually calm voice carried a softer tone. "After all of this, did you ever imagine we'd be walking together, feeling this free?" he asked with a warm smile, none of his previous formality present. I laughed softly and shook my head. "I never could have imagined," I admitted. "But here we are. After so much chaos, how peaceful everything is now. It almost feels unreal." Anthony nodded, understanding the meaning behind my words. We had walked a difficult path together. But now, what connected us was not pain or battle, but a new peace we had discovered together. Me, who might have hesitated to open my heart to someone again, allowed myself to enjoy this moment. We walked side by side, sharing the present without expectations. No need to discuss the future, no need to rush. Anthony understood what I had been through. And that understanding created a unique connection where we could be authentically ourselves. The sun began to set, painting the sky in golden and pink hues. The twilight seemed like a reflection of my life. An ending, but simultaneously the beginning of something new. Something promising more brilliance than what I had left behind. I was in control of my own destiny. And while the past wounds still existed, they no longer defined me. In that moment, I realized something important. Divorce was not just the end of a relationship, but an opportunity to rediscover myself. Everything I had experienced taught me to value myself, to understand I didn't need to rely on someone else to feel complete. My days with Kyle had been painful, but also a period that led to deep transformation. And Anthony was, in a sense, part of that evolution. Most importantly, I had learned to walk alone, to believe in my ability to build a new life. That night, back in my apartment, sitting by the window and looking at the city lights, each spark in the darkness reminded me of the decisions that had freed me from what once confined me. The space that had once felt lonely now felt comfortable, a true home. A place where I could face myself and enjoy my independence, a sanctuary of peace. I picked up the diary I had started writing during the first weeks of divorce, reading pages filled with anxiety. Words that once seemed saturated with sadness and despair now felt distant, almost unreal. As if written by someone else. And in a sense, they were. The Christina who exists now is a new person. One who refuses to let the past define her future. Turning the pages, I noticed a pattern. In each moment of weakness, a spark of hope existed. Seeds of strength that slowly germinated, creating the woman I am today. That night, closing the diary, I felt a sense of peace beyond words. The tranquility I had been seeking wasn't in the legal battle's result, or in a new relationship, but in my own ability to move forward, to live on my own terms. Stepping out onto the terrace, wrapped in the fresh night air, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. A moment of gratitude for everything I had learned and the people who supported me on this journey. The future remained unwritten, but I now knew I was prepared to face whatever might come. Smiling softly, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Life has given me a second chance. And this time, I was ready to embrace it fully. Without fear, without rushing, simply living. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know which part moved you the most, and what other stories you'd like to hear. Thank you for joining us on this journey filled with emotion and surprise.